Today you are going to hear the testimony of Amina al-Sadiq, a Saudi princess raised among gold, armed guards and royal protocols, yet carrying a void so deep that not even all the palace privileges could hide it. On a silent night in Riyadh, when family pressure was about to crush her, one simple forbidden gesture changed everything. She clicked on a video of Charlie Kirk, and there, between words about truth, freedom and identity, something tore through her heart like lightning. What began as curiosity became persecution, escape, the risk of death, and an encounter that no political or religious system managed to stop. Get ready, because what you are about to hear today has suspense, pain, courage, and a twist that will leave you speechless. And to begin, check if you are already subscribed, like the video, and tell me where you are watching from, because this story is going to move you deeply.
I grew up believing that the entire world was divided into two sides, the side inside the palace gates, and everything else. When I close my eyes, I can still see those endless hallways, so silent that the sound of my own heartbeat echoed against the marble walls. I remember the smell of incense burning in the inner courtyards, the servants who walked so softly they seemed to float, and the way every gesture I made was observed, evaluated, corrected. I was only a girl, but I was never treated like one. From the moment I learned to walk, I also learned to behave as someone who carried my entire family's name on my shoulders. My father held a position of influence that few people can truly understand. In meetings, he spoke softly, yet everyone fell silent to listen. And even as a child, I understood that being his daughter meant being shaped into an expectation impossible to reach. With every step I took, there were eyes watching me. I grew up surrounded by luxury, but that never meant freedom. On the contrary, every detail of my life was controlled as if it were part of a royal protocol I never signed, but belonged to without question. From a very young age, I was awakened before the sun rose for rigid lessons. I sat before large books, studying the Quran with a teacher whose gaze was severe, memorizing passages word for word, with no room to ask, no room to feel. I repeated verses while my hands trembled over the carpet. Memorization was not only required, it was imposed with a pressure the world will never see. In the afternoon, I was taken to public ceremonies where I had to smile with elegance, maintain perfect posture, recite what I had memorized, and act as if everything was fine, as if it were natural to be perfect all the time, as if that did not crush me from the inside. I learned to speak softly, to look down, to move my hands with grace, to eat with extreme delicacy, to walk with control. Everything was about control. And yet, none of those instructions answered the silent questions I carried inside me. I saw my family admired by the world, but inside me a hole kept growing, something I did not know how to name. I felt alone even when surrounded by people. I felt fear even when protected by guards. I felt doubt even while repeating beliefs taught to me as absolute truths. Little by little, the silence inside me started to hurt. I wondered who I was beyond the title, beyond the lineage, beyond the responsibilities, but I never dared to confess any of this to anyone. In my reality, questioning was the same as betrayal, and betrayal was far too dangerous. So I learned to smile on the outside and remain silent on the inside. The only moment I experienced anything different was when I was given permission to study in the United States. It was like stepping through a portal into another universe. I remember my first day at the university, young people speaking openly, laughing loudly, expressing opinions without fear, questioning professors, disagreeing, debating. It felt like science fiction to someone like me. For the first time, I breathed without feeling that someone was weighing my choices. Walking through the streets without being followed, entering a bookstore without an escort, hearing different ideas. Everything was new. There I realized that there were questions I had never been allowed to ask. Discussions about faith, freedom, purpose, and identity that I had never imagined. I discovered that the world was bigger than the limits I had been taught, and that marked me deeply. But the time away was not long enough to undo what I carried inside. When I returned to my country, it felt as if someone had turned off a light in my soul. Everything I experienced in the United States vanished like smoke. Suddenly the doors closed again. The formal meetings returned. The constant presence of guards returned. The obligation to appear perfect returned. It was like waking from a dream only to return to a maze I would never choose. And as if that were not enough, my family began pressuring me into an arranged marriage. A man chosen not for compatibility, not for love, but for the political usefulness of the union. It suffocated me. I tried to smile, tried to appear as the ideal daughter, but inside an overwhelming sense of spiritual imprisonment grew. It was as if each day a piece of me was being silently torn away. The conflict began when I said no. The word left my mouth almost without sound, but it caused an earthquake inside our home. My father was in shock, not because I disagreed, but because I had the courage to say it aloud. From that day on, my world became tighter. My privileges were temporarily taken away. My phone was confiscated, my outings were reduced, my routine was observed even more closely. I stopped being seen as the exemplary princess and began being seen as a problem to be corrected. As if all of this were not enough, I witnessed something that marked me forever. I cannot give details about the event out of respect for guidelines and for safety, but I can say that I witnessed a scene of religious punishment against a woman who had been accused of abandoning her faith. It was not only physical violence, it was emotional, spiritual, psychological. I saw despair in her eyes, and it awakened something that had been sleeping inside me. It was as if God allowed me, for a single moment, to see what it meant to live imprisoned on the outside and on the inside. I felt broken seeing her in that situation. And from that day on, the doubts I had been hiding became so loud that they could no longer be silenced. After that, my mind began to collapse. I started having anxiety attacks. I would wake up several times during the night feeling like my breath would stop. My heart would race even when I was sitting in silence. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't talk. Everything inside me seemed out of control. I tried to follow the perfect routine, tried to repeat the right words, tried to please my father, but none of that resolved the internal war I was living through. Till one night, in utter despair, I locked myself in my room. No one saw me come in. No one heard the door. I threw myself on the floor, my head resting on the bed, and for the first time in my life I spoke truthfully. My voice came out broken, as if it had been held back for years. I just whispered, "God, if you are real, please show me something. I can't take it anymore." I cried until I was exhausted. My face burned, and my eyes seemed incapable of producing any more tears. I didn't know exactly who I was talking to. I only knew that, somehow, someone needed to hear me. I felt so alone in that immense palace that it would be impossible to explain it to anyone. So I cried some more, as if I were letting out all the years of silence. When I finally managed to breathe, still trembling, I secretly grabbed my phone. I knew using a VPN was risky, that any search could be tracked, that any wrong video could turn into a huge problem. But I also knew that if I didn't search for something that night, I would completely fall apart. I just wanted to clear my mind. I just wanted a moment of peace. That's when the unexpected happened. I opened YouTube, expecting to find some neutral videos, some soft music, but no. The first thing that appeared on the screen was a recommended video with the name ... Charlie Kirk. I'd heard his name while studying in the United States, but I had never stopped to watch anything by him. The video cover had words like freedom, truth, and identity. And I felt something strange, as if that video had been placed there for a reason I didn't yet understand. I clicked. The moment Charlie started talking, I felt my heart race in a way I'd never felt before. He spoke of faith, of purpose, of inner freedom, but he spoke in a way completely different from anything I knew. There was no imposition in his voice. There was no fear. There was no pressure. There was conviction, and there was love. It was as if he were describing questions I'd never had the courage to ask. I remember the light in my room seemed different at that moment. I don't know if it was my exhausted mind. I don't know if it was the reflection of the screen, but everything became softer, warmer. I felt a warmth in my chest, a sensation I couldn't explain. And without realizing it, tears began to fall from my face. They weren't tears of despair like before. They were tears of something new, something I couldn't identify. And then he said a phrase that pierced my soul as if it had been directed at me. Jesus came to set free even those who live hidden in fear, in silence. I froze. At that moment, it felt like he was looking straight inside me, as if he knew I lived hidden, afraid, in silence, all the time. I felt my breath catch. I put my hand to my chest, and, almost without realizing it, I whispered, "If this is true, who are you?" That's when an intense peace fell over me. It wasn't explainable. It wasn't rational. It was as if the air in the room had changed. I felt a presence I had never felt before, a silent certainty, a calmness that contrasted completely with everything I had experienced in recent months. It wasn't a complete change yet. It was just a seed, but it was enough for me to know that that night would be unlike any other. I spent the entire night watching Christian videos secretly, with an open heart and a trembling soul. I wanted to understand who this Jesus was who seemed to call my name in silence. And it was there, in that forbidden early morning, that something inside me began to awaken. When I woke up the morning after that forbidden night, I still felt remnants of that strange peace in my chest, as if something had been ignited inside me. But, at the same time, the fear of being discovered made my heart race just from opening my eyes. I knew that, in that environment, everything could change from one minute to the next. Still, however contradictory it seemed, there was a part of me that was finally breathing, and I had no idea that the confirmations would begin so quickly. The first one came so unexpectedly that I almost fell out of my chair when I heard the news. My mother came into the room with a strange expression, a mixture of worry and embarrassment. She sat on the edge of my bed, took a deep breath, and said that the man my family was pressuring me to marry had sent a formal message, refusing the marriage. That was simply impossible. Men don't refuse advantageous political alliances. Men don't refuse to marry someone of my status. His justification was even more bizarre. He claimed to have had a bad feeling about me. My mother didn't want to use the word, but I realized that, for her, it meant bad luck, instability, or worse, spiritual rebellion. But for me, it was as if God had spoken loudly inside my chest. I tried to keep a neutral face, but inside I was on fire. It was as if a door had been locked by heaven itself, preventing me from entering something that would destroy me. I hadn't asked for anything like that, but it was exactly the kind of response a desperate soul recognizes immediately. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. The second confirmation came a few days later in an even more frightening and at the same time liberating way. I was walking through the inner gardens of the palace when my phone rang. It was my best friend from the United States, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. She answered excitedly, and before I could say anything, she commented, "Amina, your voice, it sounds different. You're calmer, more alive." That caught me off guard. I hadn't told anyone about what I'd felt in the early hours of the morning during the video, about the warmth in my chest, about the peace that had come over me. But suddenly, someone on the other side of the world could hear my breathing and said, I seemed alive. I remember looking at my hands at that moment, realizing that, in fact, my tremors had lessened. My anxiety, which used to wake me up in the middle of the night, had disappeared without me even noticing. For the first time in months, I was breathing deeply, without fear of what would come next. But it was the third confirmation that truly made me understand that something supernatural surrounded me, something I couldn't explain. But that was somehow protecting me without me asking. It was during a formal dinner, one of those stifling events where everyone is watching my every move. I was seated next to influential women, with guards positioned behind us like silent shadows. My cell phone was hidden inside my bag, but one of the security agents approached and asked to check everyone's devices. It was standard protocol, but that day, my body went cold. I knew that if he opened my phone, he might find some notification, some remnant of the videos I had watched in the early hours of the morning. Even after deleting the history, I was never sure if something wasn't left behind somewhere. I handed over the phone with a trembling hand. He held the device, unlocked it with the authorized fingerprint I was forced to register. And in the exact second, the screen lit up. The power went out in the entire hall. I will never forget that moment. The palace plunged into complete darkness. Voices began to mingle. Some people stood up startled. The guards pulled out flashlights, and the agent who had my cell phone simply returned it, saying he would check it later. But the after never happened. It was as if that blackout had been synchronized with the exact second my life was about to be destroyed. I sat paralyzed in my chair, listening to my own breath echoing inside my head. And for the first time, I understood effortlessly. That was no coincidence. That was intervention. That same night, when I got to my room, I couldn't hold back the tears. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, knelt on the cold marble floor, and let it all out. I was trembling, not from fear, but from something I couldn't yet name, something between gratitude, relief, and shock. And it was there, in that cramped space between the floor and the sink, with the yellow light reflecting in the mirror, that I finally said what had been burning inside me since the night of the video. I whispered, but it felt like my soul screamed, "Jesus, if you are what I saw, then I want to know you." From that moment on, something changed profoundly within me. But outside, everything started to become even more dangerous. The following days were different. I tried to go about my business as usual, but the people around me noticed that something was happening, even without knowing what. My family, used to seeing me rigid, silent, and submissive to traditions, began to notice that I was more reserved. Not in my outward behavior, but in that silence that carried meaning. They saw that I was reflecting too much, observing too much, feeling too much. I could tell when our eyes met. My mother would pass by me with an almost uncomfortable expression, as if trying to decipher something that slipped through the cracks in my posture. My father, on the other hand, began to act practically and calculatingly. He didn't ask direct questions, but discreetly ordered the security agents to monitor my digital activities, my conversations, my schedules, my movements inside and outside the palace. I found out about the surveillance because one of the maids, someone who had felt sorry for me since I was a child, quietly warned me while making my bed. She said just one sentence, "They're watching you." And at that moment, the little peace I still had completely evaporated. From that day on, I began living in a tremendous state of alert. Every time my cell phone vibrated, my heart raced. Every time I watched a Christian video in secret, I immediately deleted everything: history, cookies, incognito tabs, downloads, hidden logs. I did this every night before bed with almost military precision, but even so, I lived in fear that something would slip through. The fear wasn't symbolic, it was real. It was physical. I felt my skin tingle every time I heard footsteps in the hallway. I slept with my cell phone inside a metal case to prevent anyone from reading it nearby. I deleted my notes, my secret journey, anything that could reveal the change that was happening inside me. And yet, while I was hiding, my faith, that nascent faith, that faith that had entered me like a whisper, grew in a way I couldn't contain. It was as if two forces were fighting inside my chest. Faith and fear. The fear of dying. The fear of shaming my family. The fear of never being able to tell the world that I had found a truth that made my heart breathe again. Sometimes I would look at my own reflection in the mirror and feel guilty. I would look at that face that carried tradition, lineage, history, and wonder if I was betraying everything, betraying my culture, betraying my roots, betraying people who, despite being strict, loved me in their own way. An emotional war that I didn't know how to win. The nights were the worst. I would lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, listening to the conditioned sound of the palace fans. And I wondered if it was possible to live between two such opposing realities. It was as if a new path had opened before me, but I was trapped in forbidden territory. It was as if everything inside me yearned for freedom, spiritual freedom, but everything around me demanded silence. I started losing weight, not from sadness, but from constant tension. My fingers trembled when I held a pen. My secret prayers were said with the door locked, and my heart racing as if I had committed a crime. I knew I couldn't live like this forever. Each day felt like a step closer to a precipice. And then I made the most dangerous decision of my life. I decided to run away. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't make any written plans. I didn't ask for help. It was something so risky, so impossible, that it could only be done in absolute silence. I knew that if I could cross a single border, maybe I'd have a chance. Maybe I could breathe without fear for the first time. But what I didn't expect was that my escape attempt wouldn't stay hidden for long. They found out. And at that moment, my world began to tremble again. When my escape attempt was discovered, I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. There were no screams, no confrontations, no arguments. Everything happened with calculated coldness in such a silent way that it became even more frightening. 2 women from the security team entered my room before dawn, asked me to get up and put on a cloak, and said that my father wanted to see me. But as I descended the inner palace stairs, I immediately realized that this had nothing to do with a family gathering. There were more guards than usual. There was too much silence. There was something in the air, a heavy, almost palpable atmosphere that gave the feeling that I was crossing an invisible threshold. I was taken to a dark car with no transparent side windows, and no one explained anything to me. They just told me not to ask questions. I kept my hands on my lap, trying to calm my breathing, but my heart was pounding so hard it felt like everyone could hear it. As the car drove along roads I already knew, I realized we were leaving the city, heading towards an isolated area. That's when it started to sink in. They had discovered something. Maybe not everything, but enough to consider me a risk. When we arrived at our destination, I saw a grey, low-rise building with no large windows, surrounded by high walls. It had no name, no signs, nothing to indicate its purpose. It was one of those places that only exist for those who should exist. I knew it wasn't a hospital, it wasn't an educational center, it wasn't a convent, it was something else. Something that many people in my country pretended not to know existed, but that existed for those who deviated from the rules. I was ushered inside without explanation. The doors closed behind me automatically, with a metallic sound that cut through the air like a warning. Women walked through the corridors in absolute silence, all with their eyes downcast. Some seemed apathetic, others fearful, others completely lost. No one spoke, no one cried. No one dared to look at those who entered. I was placed in a narrow room with walls that were too white, light that was too bright, and no windows. It's just a thin bed, a blanket, a prayer rug folded in a corner, and a heavy door with a small grate. There, in that space, time ceased to exist. I didn't know if it was days, hours, or weeks. I only knew that the sun never came in. I only knew that that constant darkness messed with my mind. Sometimes someone would bring food through the opening in the door. White rice, dry bread, water. No one spoke to me. No one said why I was there. But I knew. Deep down I knew. They had seen some conversation, some accidentally saved fragment, something that slipped through in my effort to erase everything every night. I understood that in that place there was no room for justifications. I could only wait, and waiting was worse than any answer. After a few days, or what seemed like days, one of the guards entered my office. He wasn't aggressive, but there was something in his gaze that sent shivers down my spine. He walked slowly until he was standing in front of me, and said in a low voice, "Your last name carries a lot of weight here. You know what it means to be in this place." I remained motionless. He approached and added, "If you want to leave, you need to confess what you did. You need to admit that you've sinned. You need to say that you've strayed." The air grew heavy as stone. I knew what he wanted. He wanted me to deny everything that had happened inside me, to erase that seed that had sprouted in the early hours of the video, to pretend I had never felt that peace, that calling. But I couldn't say anything. My silence seemed to irritate him. He watched me for a few more seconds, as if trying to find cracks in my soul, and then left, locking the door tighter than he should have. When I was alone again, my legs trembled. I knelt on the floor and began to pray softly, almost silently, just moving my lips. It was the only thing I had left. I said Jesus' name in my mind, afraid to say it aloud, but repeating, "Stay with me. Please stay with me. I don't know what to do. Don't know what will happen, but stay with me." And it was there, in that secret whisper, that something surprising happened. A clerk came in to leave the food tray. She kept her head down, like all the other women there. But when she put the tray down and turned to leave, she dropped a piece of paper folded on purpose, a movement so discreet that I almost didn't notice. When she left, and the door closed, I picked up the paper with trembling hands. Inside, there was only one sentence written in small print. "You are not alone. Jesus is here." Hold on a little longer. I felt my chest explode from the inside. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know where she came from, but I knew she was risking everything to give me that note. I sat on the floor with the paper between my fingers and cried silently, without making a sound. It was as if that small piece of paper carried the very breath of God. From that moment on, I found strength I didn't know I had. Every time fear tried to overwhelm me, I pressed that note against my chest and mentally repeated, "I am not alone. I am not alone." That became my sustenance in that place, without windows, without time, without hope. But a few days later, or what seemed like days, the woman disappeared. She didn't come back to deliver food. She didn't walk the corridors. She didn't cross my path again. No one told me anything, but I knew. Something had happened to her. Maybe because of me. Maybe because they discovered her faith. Maybe because, like me, she carried within her something that place couldn't control. I will never forget the weight of that absence, but I will also never forget the power of that note. It not only helped me survive in there, but it also made me make a decision that would change everything. After some time, I don't know how long, because everything inside is hazy, I was released. But not as before. I was taken back to the palace under even stricter surveillance. Guards followed my every step like shadows. I could barely breathe without feeling that someone was assessing every detail. But I was no longer the same. I had seen too much. Felt too much. God had sustained me where no one else could. And I knew that if he had kept me safe in there, he had a greater purpose. Either I faced it head-on, or I would live forever imprisoned. That's when I made the boldest and most dangerous decision of my life. I would run away again, but this time, I wouldn't run away alone. There were 2 women in that center, 2 women I saw being treated unfairly, 2 women broken by fear. I knew that if I ran away and left them behind, I would carry that guilt forever. So I hatched a silent plan, relying only on faith and courage I didn't know I possessed. In the sweltering early morning, while the palace slept, I placed my veil over my face, grabbed the 2 women by the hands, and we ran through the darkness as if life itself were pushing our feet forward. The escape was desperate. Every step was a risk. Every shadow seemed like a guard. Every sound could mean the end. But something guided us, something bigger than the 3 of us. And the more we ran, the more I felt an invisible presence clearing a path where there shouldn't be one. That early morning became the decisive turning point in my life, the moment I realized there was no turning back. I was no longer just a Saudi princess. I was someone who had been touched, awakened, transformed by something that no prison, no rule, no authority could stop. When I finally crossed the border and an international protection program was activated, I felt that for the first time since I was born, I was breathing the air of life itself. In the United States, I began to experience something I never imagined. The first night I slept without surveillance, without locked doors, without eyes controlling my every move, I cried. But they were tears of relief, tears of freedom. I received a Bible from a lady at the local church, a simple, lightweight, light blue, covered Bible, and I remember the exact moment I opened it to John chapter 14. The words leaped off the page as if written for me, as if speaking directly to my story, as if explaining everything I had lived through without me needing to ask. I cried so much that the letters were blurred by my tears. That wasn't just reading. It was revelation. It was rest. It was healing. My first public prayer took place in a small church in Texas, simple, without pomp, but full of human warmth. I was afraid to raise my hand, afraid to say my name, afraid to be seen. But when I finally managed to open my mouth and say, "I want to follow Jesus," I felt as if the ceiling of that room had disappeared and the whole sky had descended upon me. From there, I began to discreetly witness to other Saudi women living in emotional and spiritual oppression. I started sending anonymous messages, offering words of comfort, recording short audio messages of faith. It was my way of giving back to the world what I had received: courage, hope, freedom. I began recording my testimony for Christian websites anonymously, hiding my face, my voice, my name. But the words carried everything I had lived through.
And if you've made it this far, take a deep breath with me. Because Amina's journey isn't just a story. It's a living reminder that no heart is beyond God's reach. From the palace to the silence of the room where she wept, from profound fear to the freedom she finally found, each step showed that when Jesus calls, nothing can stop him. Nothing. And now, after everything we've heard, I want to ask you, what did the Holy Spirit say to you through this story? If something touched your heart, stay with us. Stories like this happen more often than you think, and they need to be told. Before you go, check if you're already subscribed to the channel, leave a like to support this work, and comment below, "I love Jesus." This helps this testimony reach even more lives that need this hope. And get ready, because the next video is already appearing on your screen. An even more powerful testimony. Former Muslim in deep depression talks with Charlie Kirk and meets Jesus. Christian testimony. Click now and let God continue speaking to you.